just today introduce you a little bit to what we do at Haxiot and discuss a couple of key points around challenges of deploying IoT networks at enormous scale, because really that's what it's all about in the LP-WAN space that we're focused on. Where's the slide changer here, Martha? Okay, great. Eeny, meeny. Okay, got it. So at Hexia, this is really what we do. We are a LoRaWAN solution provider. We do end-to-end solutions. Our three key areas of product are we make a range of IoT devices, we make gateways, and we have a cloud platform. So I won't go into LoRa in detail. I think the previous speaker gave you some pretty good insights into LoRa, but for us, it's the ideal solution that meets the needs that is not serviced by cellular and lots of other technologies. In terms of key solutions, this is the areas that we're finding the majority of the use cases are appropriate for. So we've found that LoRa, with its extremely long battery life, its coverage, and its unbeatable cost point on a per-device basis, allows us to instrument everything in an organization. And instrumenting everything is what is transformative to a business. Instrumenting one thing that's particularly high value has been done to death and is done very well in the cellular world. So where we're finding a lot of use case is really in the smart buildings. So we're doing smart communities in Asia. And we're finding that these high density regions are really needing a high degree of automation to remove inaccuracy, to provide improved safety, things like smoke detectors, and really to save on consumption of resources that are just burning out of control. So we've got water resources, we've got fuel resources. These things in foreign markets are extremely precious, less so here domestically in the US, where I think the use cases for LoRa don't necessarily have quite the same critical scale. So I wanted to touch on one of the most important things of scale, and that is provisioning. And the reason this is so simple is that this is really what IoT should be all about in the LP-WAN space. If you do anything more than press a power button or pull a power tab to deploy your solution, you have missed the customer opportunity. And we've found with all of the IoT exploration that we've done, there are 100 different ways of provisioning, all the way from mobile apps, putting in SSIDs, pairing, you name it. Everybody's come up with their own special in-service way of doing it. And we've found success in the IoT market is all about doing this in the factory. We've found two broad areas of technology have done it well. So cellular have been doing this for years. When you buy a phone, you switch the power button on, and magic happens. It's done. It's all done in the factory, and the end user never gets to be bothered with that process. And we've found that in IoT, this is the single biggest hurdle to adoption. And this is something we've focused a lot of our time and effort on solving at a manufacturing level. We produce products that just work when you turn them on and you're done. The second key thing we've found in exploring what is the right use case to focus on is about maximizing business value, and it's the mix of unit costs versus total assets connected. So I talked about it before a little bit in terms of instrumenting every single device you have in an organization can derive transformative business models rather than just do one. So, classic example for us is in the agriculture space, where we've been doing quite a lot of work. So combine harvesters are a $500,000 asset, and they're extremely well instrumented. And to an extent, the agriculture space can derive some value from understanding all of the things that are going to go on in that combine harvester. They can figure out maintenance schedules, and they can save some OpEx. But when we start instrumenting the entire agriculture operation, where we start instrumenting every gate, every pipe, every valve, every actuator, every electric fence, they can really transform their maintenance activities. And if they've got to travel 60 miles just to fix one component in their organization, sometimes a single event save can pay for the entire cost of the infrastructure. And what's really key is driving the cost of the end unit down to a point where we can derive that business value. It doesn't make sense putting in a $200, $300, $400 sensor for an asset that is worth a fraction of that. And so that's something we've been able to achieve and we really drive forward with in terms of using LoRaWAN as a technology platform. So that were the just key points I wanted to talk to. The rest is really about questions, and I was going to sit down here with Martha and go through a few pieces.
All right, we're here with Nik Kitson, co-founder of Haxiot. Nik, you've given us some great information about really what we're saying. I wouldn't say plug-and-play IoT devices because they're not plugged into anything, but just turning it on and it works. So can you give us a few specific examples of that in the environments that you've been talking about, like smart utilities or water?
Okay, so in terms of the smart water solution we have a pilot running over in Asia. And what's key to us is when we assemble these devices and we take them off the manufacturing line, we're pre-programming them with all of the knowledge that they need to be put in the field. So an installer, from a skill perspective, they're not an electronic technician, they're not a programmer, they don't need or know or have to care what a mobile phone is. All they need to know is how to put a water meter in a pipe and pull a power tab to switch it on. And from a skills perspective and a cost of deployment perspective, it dramatically reduces that time to market. We've seen most of our competitor products in the same market require some kind of IT or technology skill set, and we avoid the whole issues of calling IT, doing provisioning and setting things up, which adds cost and just drags these things out.
Sure. And then that's the cost of deployment. What about the cost of the devices themselves? What kind of price points are you looking at?
So great question. So, the cost of devices is a little bit complex in terms of how many messages am I going to send, what is the total throughput of the solution, and we're finding that the cost of the baseband chips is a great way for vendors to sort of throw stuff out there and say, hey, my baseband chip is half of yours, but really looking at the total cost of the solution, we tend to find that it's the cost of batteries is one of the most significant items in producing a product. And the cost of producing the appropriate coverage envelope. Like if you've got a wireless technology where you want to use one base station every 10 kilometers, it's a lot harder to design a product than it is for a base station that's like Bluetooth, every 30 feet.
So what's your solution there? What have you learned and what have you trended toward?
So what we've trended towards is we solve a lot of the capacity problems with smart software. So endpoint devices that have sophisticated analysis software, sort of taking fog computing to the next level, so to speak, really does save dramatically on the cost of the device and improves the efficiency of the overall solution. And minimizing battery size to the least possible that is able to achieve the task. And we found another one that is kind of obvious in hindsight, but when we were looking at it, we thought rechargeable or replaceable batteries were the way to go. But non-serviceable IoT components, somewhat throwaway or recyclable, turned out to be the most cost-effective. So we're using single-use technology. Hey, it lasts 5 to 10 years, but it's still single-use that we return to factory for reconditioning versus forcing any kind of field upgrades or field work, which again sends you backwards on the business case.
Okay, great. Are you working directly with a lot of developers of different applications? I know you've got some boards.
So we've got the challenge of facing the tidal wave of deployment. So LoRa as a technology has been gaining ground over the last 2 years, and it has a vibrant ecosystem of 500 plus companies, and the visibility is now generating an avalanche of developers. So we have hardware developers that are looking to move their device into this ecosystem. And at last count in one market that we're working in Asia, there are 160 manufacturers that want to bring their portfolios to us. In terms of the software side, we're seeing an enormous interest from integrators. So integrators who have software and application expertise really want to get on board. And what we're finding is there's a relatively small intersection of the two. There are almost no companies that understand enough of the hardware to produce a device and have the capability to deliver software value. So we're seeing that, like we have for many years, you do need a large number of people to be brought together in one cohesive partnership to deliver a solution. And that's really driven our direction of, we've chosen certain verticals where we've got enormous demand, and we're building the whole thing top to bottom. Can every company scale to do that to many use cases? No, the answer is clearly no. But it's a very good way to go, I guess, at this early stage of adoption of this in this ecosystem.
What about the smart building vertical? Do you have any insights to share there?
So the smart building vertical, if we look at the IDC data, that represents something like 82% of the total value in IoT deployments, specifically for LPWAN. So clearly we're not ignoring that. Our take on smart building is we're focused heavily on smart communities. So we're looking at high-rises, multifamily, more the residential side. But there is definitely significant industrial plays and significant commercial building opportunities. And we're seeing it with the obvious pieces up front. People look at cost savings. So how can I reduce my HVAC bill? How can I optimize my lighting? But we're starting to see the second wave of value emerging. How can I use the data that's coming off those systems to optimize my lighting schedule, or how can I make better lighting profiles that help keep my employees awake longer when they're sleepy after lunch and so forth. People are doing some pretty crazy stuff in that space.
These bright lights, somebody got that memo. All right, do we have any questions for Nik Kitson, Haxiot?
I'm sorry. Your trials in Asia, is it possible to know what kind of farming is it? Is it a wheat farm or rice farm or?
Okay, so for those of you who didn't hear the question, what kind of farm is it? So in Asia, we're really focused on soy and rice is the key kind of crops for the farming industries that we're looking at. And they tend to be less mechanized and of lower size than what we would experience here in say the US mega farms in the Midwest.
So is it mainly to help irrigation? Is that what you're mainly doing, or is it to measure the soil content? And so what is actually what's the data you're recovering from those farms?
Yeah, so the number one in agriculture is irrigation, clearly, and the number two is things like industrial pollutants. So there's a number of those as well.
And are you doing anything in Africa?
No, we're not doing anything in Africa at this stage.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions for Nik? Are you doing much in the area of asset tracking?
So asset tracking is an emerging area. So we're sort of doing micro asset tracking, if that makes sense. So we're finding that the tooling used on construction sites in rapidly growing economies is a pretty important asset. So in any given construction site, you've got more than $5 million worth of tools, some large, some small. Traditionally, you've been able to track the big ones. If someone steals a crane, you're going to know about it. But if we're looking at smaller and smaller tools and also contracted workforces, so we're finding that managing my contractors, are they on site or are they holidaying down the road? Is part of this work, the asset tracking, because the people are an asset too. And asset tags inside of any device worth more than around about $100 is often, there's a desire to track that in terms of where it is, where it's being used, and geofencing those solutions. So we're finding that is a growing area. We're really struggling with getting just the right solutions, because you start messing with tools and start sticking technology onto them, it can become a bit of an issue from a retrofit perspective. So I really think long term that the technology will be integrated to the tools at the factory. People will instrument them day one versus the retrofit market we have today.
And in those developing economies, is a lot of that traffic still, is it backhauled to like a cellular network, or how does it finally get to the internet?
Yeah, so I mean, cellular is kind of the go-to for a lot of this. You get enormous economies of scale in that you're taking 5,000 or 10,000 IoT devices through one cellular connection, right? So compare that to putting a cellular device in every single IoT. Unless they're 5,000 times cheaper, you're definitely better off, right? So that's the de facto, but we're now finding there are folks out in the middle of the desert, so they are looking for satellite. There are folks that simply don't have LTE, or they have exorbitant costs of data. So, the enterprise WAN and fixed network infrastructure is still a valuable place to get that back. But I guess the corollary to this is we are finding that data is moving from the device to some sort of cloud compute platform. It's very rarely, if ever, staying and living on those aggregation devices.
Right. Okay. Nik Kitson, Haxiot, thank you very much.